In the small town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other's business, there lived a young man who went by the name Ethan. He wasn't rich or famous, far from it. At just 24 years old, he worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, one at a local diner during the day and another as a janitor at night. Life hadn't been kind to him, but Ethan had learned to scrape by with determination and grit. People around town often called him just another poor boy. But what they didn't see was how hard he tried to change his life. Ethan spent most of his free time at the local gym. It wasn't because he wanted to build muscles like some of the regulars. It was more of an escape for him. The clanging of weights, the rhythmic sound of treadmills, and the chatter of people working out gave him a sense of peace. It was a place where no one judged him for being broke or struggling. For those few hours every evening, Ethan could forget about his worries and focus on something simple. One fateful evening, while Ethan was stretching near the weightlifting section, he noticed someone new in the gym. She was impossible to miss. Standing nearly 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they could lift a car, she commanded attention wherever she went. Her presence was both intimidating and fascinating. Everyone in the gym seemed to glance her way, whispering behind their hands. But unlike others, this woman didn't seem bothered by the stares. Instead, she carried herself with confidence, moving gracefully despite her size. Curiosity got the better of Ethan, and he decided to strike up a conversation. "Hey," he said, trying not to sound too nervous. "I haven't seen you here before. Are you new?" The woman turned to face him, her piercing eyes softening into a warm smile. "Yeah, I just moved to town a couple of weeks ago," she replied in a deep yet gentle voice. "Name's Clara." Over the next hour, Ethan found himself talking to Clara more than he'd planned. They started off discussing workout routines. He admitted he was more into cardio, while she joked about how lifting heavy weights was her thing. But soon their conversation drifted toward deeper topics. Clara spoke openly about her past, sharing bits and pieces of her journey. She mentioned traveling across different towns and always looking for a fresh start. Ethan, in turn, opened up about his struggles and dreams of becoming a writer someday. What struck Ethan the most was Clara's kindness. Despite her imposing figure, she had a nurturing side that made him feel comfortable. By the end of their chat, they exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet again at the gym sometime soon. What began as a casual encounter quickly blossomed into something more meaningful. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Clara grew closer. They met regularly at the gym, explored the town together, and even shared meals at quiet cafes. Ethan couldn't believe how natural it felt to be around her. She listened when he talked, encouraged him to chase his dreams, and never judged him for his humble beginnings. But Clara also had a mysterious side. Sometimes she would disappear unexpectedly, claiming she needed time alone. Other times, Ethan caught glimpses of scars on her arms and legs, marks that didn't look like typical injuries from workouts. When he asked about them, Clara brushed it off, saying she was clumsy as a kid. Ethan wanted to trust her, so he let it slide. Still, these little details lingered in the back of his mind, nagging at him whenever he thought about her. 3 months into their relationship, Clara surprised Ethan with a question that left him speechless. Sitting across from him at their favorite cafe, she took his hand in hers and said, "Ethan, I know we haven't known each other for long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. Will you marry me?" Ethan froze, unsure of how to respond. Marriage was a big step, especially since they came from such different worlds. Yet, as he looked into Clara's eyes, he saw sincerity and hope. He realized that despite their differences, she made him happier than he'd ever been. So, after a moment of hesitation, he nodded. "Yes," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "I'll marry you." The news spread quickly through Willow Creek, sparking whispers and gossip among the townsfolk. Some were skeptical, wondering how a poor boy like Ethan ended up with someone like Clara. Others teased him good-naturedly, calling it a match made in heaven, or maybe a match made in a weightlifting competition. But Ethan didn't care what anyone else thought. All that mattered to him was Clara and the promise of starting a new chapter together. Their wedding was simple, but heartfelt. Held in a small chapel on the outskirts of town, it was attended by close friends and family. As Ethan stood beside Clara, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From their chance meeting at the gym to standing here today, pledging their lives to each other, it all felt surreal. The ceremony was short, filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt vows. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan felt a wave of joy wash over him. This was it, the beginning of a new adventure. After the wedding, Ethan moved into Clara's apartment, a cozy, well-furnished space that was much nicer than anything he could have afforded on his own. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. Clara continued to dote on him, cooking elaborate meals and encouraging him to work on his novel. She even surprised him with a brand new laptop, telling him it was time to stop dreaming and start writing. Ethan couldn't have asked for a better partner. However, not everything was as idyllic as it appeared. There were moments when Clara's behavior seemed off. She would vanish for hours at night, claiming she needed air or exercise. The walls of their apartment occasionally shook, as though something heavy were being dragged across the floor. And then there was the locked door to the basement, a part of the house Ethan had never been allowed to enter. When he asked about it, Clara changed the subject, redirecting the conversation to safer topics. Despite these oddities, Ethan chose to give Clara the benefit of the doubt. After all, she had given him so much: love, support, and a sense of belonging. Surely whatever secrets she kept weren't meant to hurt him. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Little did he know, the truth was far stranger and more terrifying than he could have imagined. The honeymoon phase of Ethan and Clara's marriage was sweet, but it didn't last long before the cracks began to show. At first, everything seemed picture perfect. Clara continued to shower Ethan with affection, cooking hearty meals that left him feeling full and content. She encouraged him to chase his dreams, reminding him daily about the novel he'd promised to write. Ethan felt like he was living a dream, one he never thought possible for someone like him. But as the days went by, Ethan started noticing things that made him uneasy. Clara had always been strong. Her muscles were impossible to miss. But now, her strength seemed almost unnatural. One evening, while they were unpacking boxes from their wedding gifts, Ethan watched in awe as Clara lifted a heavy dresser all by herself, carrying it across the room like it weighed nothing more than a backpack. He laughed nervously and joked, "You're not human, are you?" Clara chuckled along, brushing off his comment. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of discomfort, that stuck with Ethan. Then came the nights when Clara disappeared without explanation. She would tell Ethan she was going for a walk, or heading out to clear her mind, but these outings often lasted hours. Sometimes she wouldn't return until the early hours of the morning, looking exhausted and disheveled. When Ethan asked where she'd been, she gave vague answers. "I needed some fresh air," or "just blowing off steam." Her explanations sounded reasonable enough, but deep down, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One particular night stood out. Ethan had woken up around midnight to find Clara's side of the bed empty. He figured she was probably downstairs watching TV or reading, as she sometimes did when she couldn't sleep. But when he went to check on her, he realized she wasn't anywhere in the apartment. That's when he heard it, the faint sound of thuds coming from the basement. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The basement door was always locked, and Clara had never offered to show him what was inside. She'd mentioned once that she used it for storage, but the noises coming from behind the door didn't sound like someone organizing boxes. They were too loud, too rhythmic, like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. For a moment, Ethan debated whether he should investigate further or go back to bed and pretend he hadn't heard anything. Curiosity got the better of him. He tiptoed closer to the door, hesitating for a second before knocking softly. "Clara?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. There was no response, but the thuds stopped abruptly. Ethan waited, holding his breath until he heard footsteps approaching from the other side of the door. A moment later, Clara appeared, looking startled and slightly out of breath. "Ethan?" "What are you doing up?" she asked, forcing a smile. I heard noises," Ethan stammered. "Is everything okay?" Clara nodded quickly, her expression softening. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just doing some late-night laundry. You know how it is. Sometimes life gets busy and chores pile up." Her explanation sounded plausible, but Ethan noticed the tension in her posture, the way her hands clenched into fists before relaxing again. Something about her demeanor felt off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Still, he decided not to push the matter. After all, everyone has quirks, right? Maybe Clara just liked having her space, especially after such a big change like getting married. The next morning, however, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the previous night. As Clara bustled around the kitchen making breakfast, he found himself glancing at her curiously. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" she asked, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to phrase his thoughts. "Nothing really," he said finally, forcing a smile. "Just, you know, wondering if you've always been this good at multitasking." Clara laughed, clearly relieved by his harmless comment. "Years of practice," she replied, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Now eat up. You need energy for your writing." Despite her lighthearted tone, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was hidden beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, while Clara was out running errands, he decided to do a little snooping of his own. He searched the house for anything that might explain the strange noises he'd heard the night before. It didn't take long for him to find a spare key tucked away in a kitchen drawer. His conscience tugged at him. Was it wrong to invade Clara's privacy? But the curiosity burning inside him was stronger than his guilt. With trembling hands, Ethan unlocked the basement door and stepped inside. The air was cool and damp, carrying a faint metallic scent that made his stomach churn. The room was dimly lit, but even in the low light he could see piles of torn workout gear scattered across the floor. Some pieces looked shredded, as if they'd been ripped apart by claws rather than scissors. In the corner stood an array of weights so massive that Ethan doubted anyone could lift them, even someone as strong as Clara. As he took in the scene, a wave of unease washed over him. This wasn't normal. None of this added up. Who needed weights this size? And why would anyone destroy perfectly good clothes? Ethan's mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Before he could process what he was seeing, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Panicking, he quickly slipped out of the basement and closed the door behind him, hiding the key exactly where he'd found it. When Clara returned home later that evening, Ethan acted as though nothing had happened. He smiled, chatted about his day, and even managed to laugh at her jokes. But inside, his thoughts were swirling. The image of the basement lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like a persistent itch. Whatever secret Clara was keeping, it was bigger than he'd imagined. And the worst part? He wasn't sure if he was ready to uncover it. That night, as they lay in bed together, Ethan stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Clara's breathing steadied beside him, signaling that she was fast asleep. He wanted to believe that everything would be okay, that whatever mystery surrounded Clara wouldn't threaten the happiness they'd built together. Yet, the unanswered questions loomed large in his mind, casting a shadow over the future they'd dreamed of. Little did Ethan know, the truth was far stranger and far more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. The discovery of the basement left Ethan feeling uneasy, like a dark cloud had settled over their home. He tried to act normal around Clara, but it was hard to shake off the nagging thoughts that kept replaying in his mind. The shredded workout gear, the massive weights, the metallic smell. It all pointed to something far beyond what he could understand, and yet part of him didn't want to believe it. How could Clara, the woman who made him feel loved and valued for the first time in his life, be hiding something so strange? For days, Ethan wrestled with himself. Should he confront her about what he'd seen, or should he let it go, trusting that she had her reasons? Every time he looked at her, guilt bubbled up inside him. She was kind, thoughtful, and supportive, everything he'd ever wanted in a partner, but the image of that basement haunted him, gnawing away at his peace of mind. Finally, after a week of sleepless nights and endless internal debates, Ethan decided he couldn't ignore it anymore. If their marriage was going to work, it needed to be built on trust. And trust meant no secrets, not even ones this big. One evening after dinner, Ethan found Clara lounging on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV. She looked relaxed, almost serene, which made what he was about to do feel even harder. He sat down beside her, his palms sweaty and his heart racing. "Clara," he began hesitantly. "Can we talk?" She glanced at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Setting the remote aside, she turned to face him fully. "Of course, what's wrong?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I went into the basement the other day." For a split second, Clara's expression didn't change. Then, slowly, her smile faded, replaced by a look of unease. "You did?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with something between surprise and apprehension. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quickly. "I shouldn't have snooped, but I heard noises coming from down there and I got curious. Clara, I need to know what's going on. Those weights, the torn clothes. It doesn't make sense." Clara stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tightening as if she were wrestling with herself. Finally, she sighed deeply and leaned back, against the couch, her eyes avoiding his. "Ethan, there are things about me you don't know," she admitted softly. "Things I've been afraid to tell you because I didn't want to scare you away." Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "What kind of things?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara hesitated again, clearly struggling to find the right words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and measured. "Do you remember how I told you I travel a lot? That I move from place to place every few years?" Ethan nodded, recalling one of their early conversations. "Yeah, you said you were looking for a fresh start." "That's true," Clara continued, "but the real reason I leave is, well, it's complicated. You see, I'm not exactly ordinary." Ethan frowned, confusion written all over his face. "What do you mean?" Clara stood up abruptly and paced across the room, her movements restless. "Years ago, before I came to Willow Creek, something happened to me. Something I can't explain easily. It changed me, Ethan. Changed everything about who I am." Ethan watched her, his pulse quickening. "Changed you how?" She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "I was attacked. By an animal. A wolf, I think. At least that's what people assumed when they found me half dead in the woods. But it wasn't just any wolf. This thing, it bit me. And after that I started noticing changes. My body became stronger, faster. I healed quicker than normal. But the worst part..." Her voice trailed off, and she swallowed hard. "The worst part?" Ethan prompted, his stomach twisting with dread. "The worst part is that during certain times, especially under the full moon, I lose control. I turn into something else, something wild." Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. You're saying you turn into a wolf?" Clara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Not completely. It's more like a mix between human and animal. A monster, really. I've spent years trying to manage it, to keep it hidden from everyone. Most of the time I can stay in control. But when the moon is full..." She shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. Ethan sat there in stunned silence, his mind reeling. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The mysterious disappearances, the locked basement, the shredded workout gear. It all made sense now, though it still felt surreal. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked finally, his voice trembling. "Because I was scared," Clara burst out, her emotions spilling over. "Scared that you'd hate me, that you'd run away like everyone else has. Do you think it's easy living like this, knowing that I could hurt someone I care about? I wanted to protect you, Ethan. From me." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, For all his fears and suspicions, he hadn't once considered that Clara might be carrying such a heavy burden. All this time she'd been protecting him, not just from whatever lurked inside her, but also from the truth. Reaching out, Ethan took her hand in his. "I'm not running anywhere," he said firmly, though his own hands were shaking. "I married you because I love you, Clara. Not because of who or what you are, but because of the person you've shown me. If we face this together, maybe we can figure it out." Clara looked at him, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since they'd met, Ethan saw vulnerability in her eyes, raw, unfiltered emotion that broke his heart. "You really mean that?" she whispered. "I do," Ethan replied without hesitation. "We'll get through this, together." That night, they stayed up talking late into the early hours. Clara shared more details about her condition, explaining how she'd learned to cope with her transformations over the years. She described the rituals she followed to minimize the risks, locking herself away during the full moon, reinforcing the basement to prevent accidents, and keeping her distance whenever possible. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it had worked, so far. Listening to her, Ethan realized just how lonely Clara must have been. Despite her strength and confidence, she carried a weight no one else could understand. No wonder she'd been hesitant to open up. Yet beneath all the secrecy and fear, she was still the same person he'd fallen in love with. The same person who'd brought light into his otherwise bleak existence. As dawn broke outside their window, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, their life together would be challenging. Yes, there would be risks involved. But none of that mattered compared to the bond they shared. Together, they could face whatever lay ahead. Even the terrifying secrets of the full moon. With Clara's secret out in the open, Ethan found himself stepping into a world he never imagined existed. At first, he struggled to wrap his head around everything she'd told him. A werewolf. It sounded like something straight out of a movie or an old legend, not real life. But as the days passed, Ethan realized that this wasn't just some fantasy story. It was Clara's reality, and now it was his too. The couple spent hours discussing what came next. Clara explained that her transformations weren't random. They were tied to the lunar cycle. The closer the full moon got, the harder it became for her to control her primal instincts. That's why she always locked herself in the basement during those nights. She didn't want to take any chances, knowing how dangerous she could be if she lost control completely. Ethan listened intently, trying to absorb every detail. He asked questions, lots of them. How long does the transformation last? Is there anything I can do to help you stay calm? What happens if someone tries to break in while you're, transformed? Clara answered patiently, grateful for his willingness to learn and understand. But even as they prepared together, Ethan couldn't ignore the knot of fear tightening in his chest. What if something went wrong? What if one night, no matter how many precautions they took, Clara slipped through the cracks? Despite his fears, Ethan refused to let Clara face this alone. He decided he would stay by her side no matter what. "If you're locking yourself in the basement," he told her firmly one evening, "then I'm staying right outside the door. You're not doing this by yourself anymore." Clara protested at first, insisting it was too risky. "You don't know what I'm capable of when I lose control," she warned him. "I could hurt you, Ethan. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you." But Ethan wouldn't budge. "And I couldn't live with myself if I abandoned you," he shot back. "We're in this together, remember? Besides, maybe having me nearby will help keep you grounded." Who knows, it might make a difference. Eventually, Clara relented, though her eyes remained clouded with worry. They worked together to reinforce the basement, adding extra locks and soundproofing the walls. Clara showed Ethan how to use a special tranquilizer gun she kept hidden in case of emergencies. "Just in case things get bad," she said grimly, handing it to him. "But promise me you'll only use it as a last resort." As the days ticked by, the tension in their home grew thicker. The full moon was approaching fast, and both of them could feel it. Clara became quieter, more withdrawn, as if she were steeling herself for the battle ahead. Ethan did his best to keep things light, cracking jokes and cooking her favorite meals. but he could see the anxiety gnawing at her. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the couch, Clara suddenly blurted out, "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I hurt you, or worse?" Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand. "You won't," he said firmly. "We've done everything we can to prepare. And besides, I trust you, Clara. I know you'll fight with everything you've got to stay in control." His words seemed to calm her, at least for a moment. Still, the looming presence of the full moon cast a shadow over their lives, making every laugh feel slightly forced and every quiet moment heavy with anticipation. Finally, the night arrived. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and the full moon hung low, bathing the town in its pale glow. Ethan and Clara stood in the kitchen, neither of them speaking. The air felt electric, charged with an unspoken tension. Clara gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "It's starting," she murmured, her voice strained. Without another word, she walked toward the basement, Ethan following close behind. As she stepped inside and secured the door behind her, Ethan took his position outside, leaning against the wall. He held the tranquilizer gun loosely in his hands, reminding himself of Clara's instructions. He tried to steady his breathing, focusing on the sound of his own heartbeat to drown out the growing unease. Inside the basement, Clara braced herself for the inevitable. Her body began to tremble as the transformation took hold, each wave of pain sharper than the last. She clenched her teeth, fighting against the primal urges clawing at her mind. Outside, Ethan heard the first signs of struggle, a low growl followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to stay put, gripping the tranquilizer gun tightly. Minutes stretched into hours, and the sounds coming from the basement grew louder and more chaotic. Snarls echoed through the walls, accompanied by the sickening crunch of metal bending under immense pressure. Ethan's heart raced as he imagined the worst-case scenario, Clara losing control entirely, breaking free of the reinforced room, and attacking him before he could react. But deep down, he refused to believe that would happen. He trusted her. He had to. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. Silence fell over the house, broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. For a moment, he thought the worst had happened, that Clara had succumbed fully to the beast within her. Summoning every ounce of courage, he approached the door cautiously. "Clara," he called out, his voice trembling. There was no response. Taking a deep breath, Ethan unlocked the door and pushed it open slowly. Inside, the room was in shambles. Weights lay scattered across the floor, and the walls bore fresh scratches and dents. In the corner, huddled against the far wall, sat a massive wolf-like creature. Its fur was matted with sweat, and its glowing eyes flickered with a mixture of fury and despair. For a split second, Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. Then, remembering Clara's earlier words, he spoke softly, keeping his tone calm and steady. "Clara, it's me, Ethan. You're safe. You're okay." The creature whimpered, lowering its head as if ashamed. Slowly, it uncurled itself and crawled forward, its movements hesitant. Ethan stayed rooted in place, his heart pounding wildly. As the beast drew closer, he noticed something familiar in its eyes, the same warmth and vulnerability he'd always seen in Clara's gaze. "It's all right," he whispered again, crouching down to meet the creature's level. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." The wolf let out a soft whine, pressing its massive head against Ethan's shoulder. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized that somewhere beneath all that fur and muscle was still the woman he loved. Gently, he wrapped his arms around the creature, holding it as tightly as he dared. Despite its size and power, it felt fragile, in his embrace like a frightened child seeking comfort. By the time dawn broke, the transformation had reversed. Clara lay curled up on the cold basement floor, naked and shivering, her body battered and bruised from the night's ordeal. Ethan quickly grabbed a blanket and draped it over her, pulling her into his arms. "You did it," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You fought so hard." Clara's eyes fluttered open, filled with exhaustion and gratitude. Did I hurt anyone? She croaked, her voice hoarse. No, Ethan assured her. You didn't hurt anyone. Not this time. She buried her face in his chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, for staying, for believing in me. Ethan kissed the top of her head, holding her even tighter. Always, he promised. No matter what. That morning marked a turning point in their relationship. Though the full moon would continue to bring challenges, Ethan and Clara faced them together. Each passing month brought new lessons, new strategies, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love someone. Not despite their flaws, but because of them. Their bond strengthened with every trial, proving that love wasn't about perfection. It was about standing side by side, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. And for Ethan and Clara, that was enough. The aftermath of that first full moon left both Ethan and Clara physically and emotionally drained. For days, Clara barely spoke, retreating into herself as she processed everything that had happened. She couldn't shake the memory of losing control, of becoming something she feared, a creature driven by instincts rather than reason. Despite her strength and resilience, she felt fragile, like a glass vase teetering on the edge of a table. The thought of what could have gone wrong haunted her. Ethan noticed the change in her immediately. Gone was the confident woman who had once walked into his life with such certainty. In her place was someone burdened not just by her condition, but also by guilt. Every time she looked at him, there was a flicker of shame in her eyes, as if she expected him to walk away at any moment. But Ethan wasn't going anywhere. If anything, seeing Clara's vulnerability only deepened his resolve to stand by her side. One afternoon, while they were sitting quietly in their living room, Ethan broke the silence. You saved me, he said softly, his voice cutting through the stillness. Clara turned to him confused. What do you mean? That night, Ethan continued, leaning forward earnestly. When I was down there with you, when things got bad, you didn't attack me, you didn't lash out, instead you came to me asking for help. That takes strength, Clara. Real strength. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. But I almost lost it, Ethan. If you hadn't been there, if I'd hurt you, but you didn't, Ethan interrupted firmly. And that's because of who you are. Not the wolf, not the monster people might see, but you. You fought back. You stayed connected to me even when it must have felt impossible. His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, Clara had defined herself by her condition, letting it dictate how she lived her life. She'd spent years running from towns, relationships, and connections, convinced that she didn't deserve happiness. But here was Ethan refusing to let her push him away, reminding her that she was more than her struggles. It was overwhelming and incredibly humbling. Over the following weeks, they worked together to create a new routine. They reinforced the basement further, adding padding to the walls and installing a panic button Ethan could press if he ever needed immediate assistance. Clara taught him how to recognize the early signs of her transformation, the subtle shifts in her mood, the tension in her muscles, the way her senses seemed heightened. These small details helped Ethan feel more prepared, giving him a sense of agency in situations where he otherwise might have felt powerless. But preparation wasn't enough. Both of them knew that managing Clara's transformations required more than physical precautions. It demanded emotional support too. On nights leading up to the full moon, Clara often struggled with anxiety, fearing the loss of control. To help her cope, Ethan suggested they spend those evenings doing calming activities together, reading books aloud, watching movies, or simply talking about their dreams and fears. These moments became sacred to them, offering a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. Still, no amount of preparation could fully erase the unpredictability of the full moon. Each month brought its own challenges, forcing them to adapt and grow stronger as a team. One particularly difficult night stands out in Ethan's memory. It was late autumn, and the air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Inside the house, however, the atmosphere was tense. Clara had been unusually restless all day, pacing back and forth as if trying to outrun the inevitable. "I don't think I can do this," she admitted finally, sinking onto the couch beside Ethan. Her hands trembled as she clasped them tightly, in her lap. "It feels worse this time, like it's closer than before." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through it," he said firmly. "Just like we always do." But when the transformation began later that night, it was clear this time would be different. The basement shook violently, the sounds of destruction echoing through the house. Ethan stood guard outside the door, gripping the tranquilizer gun so tightly his knuckles turned white. He called out to Clara repeatedly, hoping his voice would anchor her, but the snarls coming from inside grew louder and angrier. At one point, the door rattled violently as though something or someone was trying to break free. Panic surged through Ethan, and for a brief moment doubt crept in. What if he wasn't strong enough? What if Clara really did lose control this time? Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan pressed his back against the door, using his body weight to keep it shut. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm here. Fight it." For several agonizing minutes, the struggle continued. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise subsided. The house fell silent, except for Ethan's ragged breathing. Heart pounding, he cautiously opened the door and stepped inside. The scene was devastating. The basement looked like a war zone, with furniture overturned and chunks of drywall torn from the walls. In the middle of the wreckage sat the massive, wolf-like creature, its chest heaving with exhaustion. Its glowing eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment he saw a flicker of recognition, the faintest trace of Clara's humanity fighting to surface. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, lowering himself to the ground despite the danger. "You're safe now." The beast whimpered, crawling toward him hesitantly. When it reached him, it collapsed, resting its heavy head on his lap. Ethan stroked its fur gently, speaking soothing words until dawn broke and the transformation reversed. By morning, Clara lay curled up beside him, weak but alive. That experience changed them both. For Ethan, it reinforced the importance of trust, not just in Clara, but in himself. He realized that love wasn't just about words. It was about action, about showing up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And for Clara, it was a reminder that she wasn't alone. No matter how dark things got, Ethan would always be there, holding her steady. As the months passed, their bond grew stronger. They learned to navigate the highs and lows of their unique situation, finding joy in the little things, a shared meal, a quiet evening under the stars, or even the simple act of holding hands. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Together, they proved that love could conquer even the most daunting obstacles, as long as they faced them together. And so, in the quiet town of Willow Creek, the poor boy and the muscular woman forged a life neither could have imagined. A life defined, not by fear but by hope, courage, and an unshakable commitment to each other. Months turned into a year, and Ethan and Clara's life settled into a rhythm, a delicate balance between ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges. The full moons still came, each one testing their strength and resolve, but they faced them, together. Over time, they grew more confident in their ability to handle whatever lay ahead. It wasn't easy, but it was theirs. A shared journey that neither of them would trade for anything. Ethan had always dreamed of writing a novel, and now, with Clara's encouragement, he finally started putting pen to paper. His story wasn't just fiction. It was inspired by their lives, a tale of love, resilience, and the courage to face fears head-on. He wrote about a world where people weren't defined by their struggles, where even the most unlikely pairs could find happiness. Clara read every draft, offering feedback and cheering him on. "This is going to change lives," she told him one evening as they sat side by side at the kitchen table. "People need to hear this." Her words meant the world to him. For so long, Ethan had doubted himself, thinking his dreams were too big or too impractical. But Clara believed in him wholeheartedly, and her faith gave him the push he needed to keep going. Together, they celebrated small victories, finishing a chapter, finding the perfect phrase, or simply making progress when motivation felt low. Clara, too, found new purpose in their partnership. She began volunteering at a local community center, teaching self-defense classes to women and teenagers. At first, she worried about drawing attention to herself. What if someone noticed how unnaturally strong she was? But Ethan reminded her that she had gifts worth sharing. "You've been given this strength for a reason," he said. "Use it to help others." The classes quickly became popular. Participants admired Clara not only for her physical prowess, but also for her patience and kindness. Many of them confided in her, sharing stories of their own struggles, whether it was bullying, abuse, or simply feeling powerless in a world that often overlooked them. Clara listened without judgment, offering advice grounded in her own experiences. She taught them techniques to protect themselves, yes, but more importantly, she taught them to believe in their own strength. As word spread about Clara's work, some townsfolk started looking at her differently, not with suspicion but with respect. Even those who had once whispered behind her back now greeted her warmly, acknowledging the positive impact she was having on the community. Ethan couldn't have been prouder. Watching Clara step into her role as a mentor and leader filled him with admiration and gratitude. This was the woman he loved, the real her beyond the secrets and fears. But life wasn't without its hurdles. Every few months, rumors surfaced about strange occurrences around Willow Creek. Howling sounds in the distance, claw marks on trees, or reports of livestock being attacked. Some locals joked about wolves returning to the area, while others dismissed it as urban legend. Ethan and Clara knew better. They did their best to minimize risks, reinforcing the basement and ensuring Clara stayed isolated during her transformations. Still, the fear of discovery lingered like a shadow, reminding them that their peace was fragile. One day, as Ethan worked on revising his manuscript, an idea struck him. What if he included a section about their strategies for managing Clara's condition? Not explicitly, of course. He didn't want to reveal personal details, but enough to offer guidance to anyone facing similar challenges. He ran the idea, past Clara, expecting her to hesitate. To his surprise, she agreed immediately. "It might help someone out there," she said thoughtfully. "Someone who feels alone like I used to." With Clara's blessing, Ethan added a chapter to his book titled Finding Balance. In it, he shared practical tips for coping with overwhelming emotions, building trust in relationships, and finding strength in vulnerability. He framed it as general advice, but tucked within the pages were nuggets of wisdom drawn directly from their experiences. By the time the manuscript was complete, Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he'd ever known. This wasn't just his story, it was theirs. When the book was published, it received an outpouring of positive responses. Readers praised its authenticity and heart, many saying it resonated deeply with their own lives. One letter in particular stood out to Ethan. It came from a young man who described himself as different, struggling to fit in because of qualities he couldn't control. "Your book made me realize I'm not alone," he wrote. "Thank you for showing me that love and acceptance are possible no matter what." Ethan read the letter aloud to Clara, his voice thick with emotion. When he finished, they sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the words sink in. Finally, Clara reached over and took his hand. "See?" she said softly. "This is why we fight. For moments like this." Their bond continued to deepen with each passing day. Though their life was far from ordinary, they embraced it fully, finding beauty in the chaos. On quiet evenings, they'd sit outside under the stars, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Clara would reminisce about the early days of their relationship, marveling at how much had changed since then. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," she admitted one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who sees me, not just the muscles, not the strength, but me. And I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Ethan replied, smiling. "Someone who makes me want to be better, stronger, braver." They laughed, knowing how far they'd come from that fateful day at the gym. Back then, neither of them could have predicted the twists and turns their lives would take. But through it all, they held on to one truth: Love wasn't about perfection. It was about standing beside each other, flaws and all, and choosing to move forward together. Years later, when asked about their secret to happiness, Ethan summed it up in 3 simple words. We chose trust. Trust in each other, trust in themselves, and trust in the power of love to overcome even the toughest obstacles. Theirs was a story of hope, resilience, and unwavering commitment, a testament to the fact that no matter how different 2 people may seem, they can build something beautiful if they're willing to try. And so, in the quiet town of Willow Creek, the poor boy and the muscular woman proved that love knows no bounds. Together, they created a life filled with purpose, laughter, and endless possibilities, a life built not on fear but on faith in each other.